The gavel came down, thundering like a boom throughout the courtroom. "Order in the court," the judge commanded, her voice crisp, cutting through the murmurs. The sound held a heaviness that quieted even the most courageous of whispers in the crowded gallery. Everyone there was aware that this wasn't merely any trial. This was the trial that had made headlines, inundated social media, and dominated endless conversations. The man at the defense table wasn't any man. He was Kody Brown, a man who for a long time had been at the center of controversy, a man whose reputation had been founded on confidence, control, and family devotion, or at least appearances. Today, in this strained courtroom, however, the facade of control began to crack. The air was thick, heavy, near suffocating. Even the fluorescent lights overhead seemed to bite harder than ever before, boring down like unblinking eyes. Press cameras lined the rear wall, lenses trained and ready to catch the fall of a man who had once lived in the spotlight. Pens scribbled wildly across notepads. Reporters leaned into recorders, laying in sound bites that would detonate on every media outlet within hours. And the gallery too, the seats full of people leaning forward, eager for drama, for solutions, for the truth. There were strangers among them, brought here out of curiosity. There were family members, sitting tight-lipped and arms crossed. The air between them and Kody was thick with tension, a storm waiting to break just below the surface. Kody sat rigidly at the defense table. His stance was stiff, his jaw clenched, and his gaze flicked among the judge, the jury, and the crowd. Externally, he seemed to exude confidence. The same confidence that had served him for so long. But those who noticed closely saw the fissures. A drop of sweat trickled over the corner of his temple, defying the stoic mask he wore like a shield. His fingers drummed on the smooth wood of the table, not in impatience, but in barely contained worry. He had endured controversy in the past, family melodrama, public scorn, interminable conjecture. But this was not a tabloid scream, or a family feud that could be smoothed away with charm or with denial. This was the law. Cold, hard, and yielding. And today, his whole life hung in the balance. On the other side of the room, the prosecutor stood up from his seat. It was slow, controlled, attention-grabbing without having to speak a word. In his grasp, he clutched a narrow black folder. It didn't seem like much. A plain folder any office worker could have had. But everybody in that courtroom understood it was not like any other. Inside those pages, inside that narrow pile of paper, were the secrets that could ruin Kody Brown. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and approached. His shoes clicked on the tile, one step at a time, echoing in the quiet room. He came to a stop a few feet in front of the bench, cradling the folder delicately, almost ritually, as if it held something too volatile to be treated casually. "Your Honor," he started, his voice firm, assertive, ringing out in the chamber. "What we are about to disclose will change everything." The words lingered in the air, heavy with threat and promise. The audience shifted in their chairs uncomfortably. A woman in the front row exhaled a soft gasp. Reporters leaned forward, pens at the ready. Even the judge cocked an eyebrow, tapping her gavel gently, encouraging him to go on. At the defense table, Kody's attorney pushed up his glasses, his face pinched with tension. He had prepared for a lot of things: character strikes, financial inquiries, even charges of dishonesty. But there was something in the prosecutor's tone that said this was more. This wasn't evidence. This was a revelation. Kody's hand flexed into a fist under the table. His jaw grew harder. He looked over at his family sitting behind him for a reassuring glance. Some of them wouldn't look at him. Others gazed back at him with faces he couldn't decipher: hurt, suspicion, perhaps even betrayal. The prosecutor set the black folder onto the evidence table with a soft thud. The sound was greater than it needed to be, more like the shutting of a door that would never open once more. He set his hand over it, paused, allowing the tension to mount, allowing the silence to choke the room. "Evidence," he announced at last, "of documents, records, and communications never intended to become public. Files that Mr. Brown thought were interred forever." But today, the truth is revealed. The gallery burst into whispers. Some gasped, others shook their heads in amazement. The bailiff yelled for silence, but it was only a thin veil over the swelling wave of tension. Kody changed position in his seat, breathing short and hard. His eyes closed, and he leaned forward to his attorney, muttering something rapidly. His lawyer nodded, scribbling with his pen in frantic rapidity, but his face showed no conviction. He hadn't expected this. The prosecutor went on, his voice harder. For years Mr. Brown has seemed to be a man of principle, a man in control, a man who prioritizes family. But beneath that facade are secrets. Secrets that belie all of that, and with the court's leave, we will expose them step by step. The judge leaned forward, her eyes snapping. Proceed. The prosecutor opened the folder, slowly, carefully, page by page. The rustle of paper dominated the room, louder than the sound of the ticking clock on the wall. All eyes watched his hands, waiting, anticipating. Kody's lips compressed into a thin line. His shoulders were rigid, but his mind was in a panic. He knew what those files contained. He had kept them under wraps for years. Years of ensuring no one would ever lay eyes on them. And now, here they were, to be stripped bare for everyone to witness. In the gallery, Christine shifted restlessly, her hands clenching on the bench. Janelle caught her eye, wide with shock, and Mary sat rigid, her face expressionless but pale. Even Robin, arms crossed and sitting beside them, looked disturbed. None of them had anticipated this. The prosecutor held up the first page, reading it aloud. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just the tip of the iceberg. What you will witness today will dispel the myth. It will expose a man not of mastery but of manipulation, not of integrity, but of dishonesty, and not of commitment, but of betrayal. The judge brought down her gavel once more, ringing out firmly, "Order in the court." The reverberations rippled across the room, but there was nothing to stop the tempest raging behind those walls. The gallery leaned forward, the reporters scribbled furiously across their notebooks, and Kody Brown, for the first time in his life, felt the pressure of the truth bearing down on him, destroying the facade he had struggled so hard to maintain. The hush that followed was louder than the commotion that preceded it. Everyone held their breath for the next step, the first reveal, the first blow of evidence that would disentangle everything. And thus the anticipation started. The atmosphere within the courtroom was electric, reminiscent of the prelude to a storm breaking. All eyes were upon the prosecutor, who now clutched the thin black folder like a weapon. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, pulling at his tie, but remained silent. He understood that whatever was inside that folder could tip the balance in a moment. The prosecutor allowed the silence to work, piling on tension, allowing the weight of his words to sink into every space in the room. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he opened the folder. The paper rustled louder than it ought to, the sound reminiscent of the turning of a page in a silent library. The room leaned in, even the eyes of the judge narrowing with expectation. "Your Honor," the prosecutor started, holding up the first document. "What we have here is a series of financial documents, not public documents, not straightforward tax returns. These are private records, coded ledgers, secret transactions, hidden accounts, all directly linked to the defendant, Mr. Kody Brown." The court immediately responded. Gasps spread like a ripple through the gallery. Journalists wrote furiously. The shutter on a camera went click. A man in the rear grumbled, "Unbelievable," before being silenced by the bailiff. Kody tightened, his fingers clawed at the table's edge, knuckles whitening, his jaw clenched so severely it seemed it must be hurting. He spoke to his lawyer in a low voice, whispering through clenched teeth. "They can't use that," he spat. "Those files were quiet." His attorney shut him down, eyes flashing nervously toward the judge. The prosecutor went on, his tone crisp and assertive. "For years Mr. Brown has claimed that his money is open, that his loved ones have always been provided for. But these documents reveal a different story. A story of deceit, a story of funds stashed away, as his loved ones remained in the dark." He placed the first piece of paper on the evidence table. Numbers, names, and codes covered the page. It seemed normal on the surface, but the prosecutor's tone made it evil. "This entry here," he indicated with his finger in a column, is a $50,000 transfer to an account in a fictitious name. The trail was made to end, but forensic accountants followed it back. And this, he turned another page, is a string of payments. One, two, but dozens. Into accounts registered in several states. Each time the money was transferred hastily, as if it were being concealed. Whispers permeated the room. Some gasped in shock. Others shook their heads in amazement. The significance of the revelations weighed down like a lead blanket. On the defense table, Kody's composed facade was starting to crack. His lips quivered. His eyes darted nervously from the papers to the judge, to the jury and back to the folder. He had assumed those files were lost, buried so deeply they'd never be seen again. But here they were, living, tangible, and now out in the open. Christine moved uncomfortably in the gallery, her complexion pale. Janelle muttered something under her breath, but Mary kept her gaze fixed on the evidence, her face impassive. Robin, arms clenched tightly over her chest, stared at the floor. The prosecutor's voice broke the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, these papers are only a small portion of what has been discovered. But even this portion is very clear, an emerging pattern of deception and betrayal. He stopped, allowing the words to penetrate, and then, as if to drive home the point with the papers, he inserted his hand into his pocket and produced something small. It shone in the light of the courtroom, a silver USB drive. This, he said, holding it aloft for everyone to see, holds recordings, private discussions, Mr. Brown never meant anyone to hear. It had an instant impact. The courtroom erupted once more. Gasp, whisper, yell. The bailiff growled for quiet. The judge slammed down her gavel. Order, I demand order. But the genie was out of the bottle. The mere mention of tapes had ignited the room. Kody went white. His hand flew out, grasping his attorney's arm. Stop this now, he growled, low but with urgency. His lawyer muttered back savagely, there's nothing I can do if it's admissible evidence. Kody shook his head furiously, breathing more rapidly. His stoic facade was crumbling, brick by brick. The perspiration on his brow now rolled loosely, catching the light. The prosecutor leaned over and put the USB drive on the evidence table next to the documents. His voice was almost laconic now, as if he knew he had already delivered the knockout punch. These documents will not only demonstrate financial fraud, but intent. They will demonstrate conversations where Mr. Brown himself admits what he did, and how he intended to cover it up. The judge leaned forward, her gaze keen. Go slow, counselor. If these tapes are what you say they are, they could be played to the jury. But first you need to prove their authenticity. Certainly, Your Honor. The prosecutor answered suavely. The gallery leaned in, panting, anticipating. A few held their phones, already composing headlines. The others just gazed at Kody, anticipating a response. Kody sat paralyzed. As a man who has stepped into the headlights of a hurtling train, he parted his lips, as though to speak, but words refused to emerge. His throat constricted, swallowing hard, but his silence was louder than any denial. The prosecutor struck the folder gently, in a mocking manner before he moved away. We will start with the papers, Your Honor, and then with the recordings. What you are going to hear will leave no doubt. The judge nodded briefly. Very well, proceed. The prosecutor addressed the jury, his voice dropping, drawing them in like conspirators. Ladies and gentlemen, try to imagine for a moment what it would be like to live in a lie, to be told one thing, when the truth is kept secret, to believe in loyalty, while there is betrayal lurking in the shadows. That is what these documents expose, and that is what we are going to prove. The room was still once more, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of shock, of tension, of individuals holding their breath and waiting for the axe to fall. Kody sat stiff, his chest heaving and falling with each breath. He wished he could shout that it wasn't true, that it was a misinterpretation, that it was all taken out of context. But he couldn't, because in the back of his mind, he knew the proof was real. And then it was played. When those recordings and files were revealed, there would be no turning back. The prosecutor's hand hovered above the USB drive. He looked at the judge, awaiting the cue. Proceed, she said sternly. The gallery was in suspense. The jury leaned in, the cameras snapped, and so did the truth come a step closer to the light. The judge's gavel came down once again. a loud crack that stopped the agitated gallery. "Continue," she instructed. The prosecutor nodded curtly and approached the evidence table, grasping the tiny silver USB drive. He handled it carefully, as if it were a delicate but deadly thing, an item of a single piece of metal and plastic that could topple an empire. "Your Honor," he stated, voice silky but measured, "with the court's permission, the prosecution would like to play the tapes on this device." The judge's eye was hard, guarded. "Have these tapes been authenticated?" "Yes, Your Honor. They were authenticated by independent forensic analysts. The voice on these tapes has been compared, without question, to the defendant, Mr. Kody Brown." A murmur ran through the room. The words with certainty seemed to resonate off the walls, piercing Kody like a knife. He rocked back in his seat. His attorney spoke under his breath, calmed him, but Kody's eyes flashed with panic. "They can't play that. They can't." His voice broke into a whisper, only his attorney could possibly hear. But the judge had already given his word. "Very well. Play the first recording." The prosecutor inserted the USB into the laptop. The speakers in front of the courtroom crackled to life. For a moment, nothing but static, a hiss that had the audience sitting forward eagerly. Then suddenly, a voice, not any voice, Kody's voice. Calm, clear, familiar, unmistakable. "If they ever find out," the voice said, steady but heavy with calculation, "everything will collapse. They can never see the real files. Not Christine, not Janelle, not Mary, no one." The words dangled there as if a bomb had gone off in super slow motion. The audience collectively gasped. Christine's hand shot to her mouth. Her eyes opened wide with shock. Janelle buried her face in her hands and shook her head, as if punched. Mary was silent, her lips set in a thin white line. Robin stared at Kody, her expression confusion and betrayal. The gallery exploded into murmurs, a tempest of outrage and shock. The bailiff bellowed for order. Journalists wrote furiously, recording every word, every emotion. Kody pounded his fist on the defense table. "That's taken out of context," he growled, his voice cracking, frantic. "That's not Mr. Brown," snapped the judge, her gavel crashing down. "You will be quiet while evidence is being presented." The courtroom once more grew silent, everyone's eyes once more returning to the speakers. The prosecutor again hit play. Another recording started. Kody's voice once more, but this time colder, darker. "They believe I'm being truthful with them, but they don't see. Control is the key. If I lose control, I lose everything. So I keep the files on their own. I keep the books secret. It's the only way." Gasps filled the room a second time. A voice from the gallery whispered, "Oh my God," before the bailiff clapped a hand over their mouth. Kody's face flushed red, his eyes feral. He strained forward, his voice trembling, as he spoke furiously to his attorney. "This isn't right. This isn't fair." They twisted it, but his attorney was pale too. The fact was irrefutable. The jury had heard the words from Kody's lips themselves. The prosecutor continued to play the recording. Each sentence hammered another nail into the coffin. Kody speaking of clandestine meetings, of transferring money, of holding family members in line. One clip cut deeper than the others. Kody's low, sneering voice declared, "They'll never question me. They believe the image I built. As long as I keep the show going, I control the story. They don't need to know the truth." The response was instant and devastating. Christine's eyes welled with tears. Janelle breathed softly. "I knew it," her voice trembling. Mary turned aside, as if she couldn't bring herself to look at him. Even Robin, the wife who had come to his defense most strongly, shook her head slowly. Incredulity etched upon her face. The gallery hummed like a hive. People muttered furiously. Others gasped. Others stood frozen in shocked silence. The air was charged, volatile, heavy with shock and betrayal. The judge struck the gavel once more. Order. But there was no order in Kody's brain. His reality was falling apart quicker than he could keep up. His secrets, those private bits of his empire, were being ripped out, shown to the world. He glanced around hopefully, to the judge, to the jury, to his family, to the media. But no matter where he looked, he saw only doubt, disappointment, betrayal. No one was in his corner. Finally, the prosecutor ended the recording. He let the silence hang, let the impact of Kody's words linger. Then he turned to the jury. his face serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard the truth. Not my words. Not speculation. His own words. Words he never intended anyone to hear. Words that prove his deception was deliberate, that he knew exactly what he was doing, and exactly what he was hiding." The jury sat stiff, their faces grim. Some shook their heads, others stared at Kody as if seeing him for the first time. Kody attempted to speak, but his attorney caught his arm, mouthing ferociously, "Don't say anything." Too late. The harm was done. For the first time, Kody Brown, the man who had ever been about control, was completely helpless. His own voice had betrayed him. His own secrets had become his executioner. The judge's voice interrupted the silence. "This court will recess for 15 minutes. The gavel came down again. The jury rose. The crowd hummed. The reporters surged for the exits, ready to blast the recordings all over every network. Kody leaned forward, his fingers shaking. His attorney spoke in urgent urgency, but the words barely penetrated. He was sinking, drowning in the sound of his own voice, a voice that no longer could be avoided. The recess was over, and the crowd reeled back into the courtroom, with the agitated energy of those who had just seen history unfold. The atmosphere was thicker now, a heavy mixture of gossip, speculation, and unbridled anticipation. Everyone had heard the tapes. Everyone had heard the sound of Kody's voice incriminating himself for the secrets he had kept hidden for so long. But now, the whispers went around like wildfire. What else could they possibly have? The bailiff's voice resonated. "All rise." The judge returned, her dark robe flowing, her face unyielding. She took her seat, striking the gavel once. "Court is in session again. Prosecutor, you may continue." The prosecutor stood effortlessly, his face impassive, though a flash of subdued confidence danced in his eyes. He advanced to the evidence table and arranged a series of files, photographs, and sealed envelopes. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we've already presented would be damning in itself. But the story doesn't end with hidden accounts or private recordings. The truth runs deeper. And today we will bring it all into the light." He picked up a photograph, holding it high for the jury to see. "This," he continued, "is a photograph from one of the defendant's private storage units. It reveals not only his role in financial tampering, but his attempts to destroy evidence." The bailiff escorted the photo to the jury box. They craned forward, their eyes squinting, exchanging hushed whispers. Gasps spread through the gallery as a larger copy of the photo was displayed on the courtroom monitor. It was a picture of a handwritten accounting book, figures written in ink, codes jotted in the margins. At the very bottom was one signature. Distinct, irrefutable. Kody's. The gallery erupted once more, murmuring in shock. Christine placed her hand over her mouth. Janelle shook her head, breathing softly. "I just can't believe this." Mary sat stiff, her expression empty, but her hand shook in her lap. Robin's mouth hung open, her eyes moving from the photograph to Kody, seeking an explanation. Kody's shoulders slumped. He said something to his attorney, but his tone was faint enough for the first row of seats to catch. "That shouldn't be here. That wasn't supposed to be here." The prosecutor had not yet done. He grasped a sheaf of printed paper. "These," he said, "are contracts and agreements made under false guise. Deals that enriched Mr. Brown individually, while deceiving those around him." The judge motioned for the bailiff to hand them to the jury. The papers crinkled as they were handed on. Some of the jurors scowled. Others looked at each other. "Here," the prosecutor went on, indicating one line, "there is a contract in which Mr. Brown was paid for a business deal he never shared with his family. And here, another in which money was directed into a private account held in his name. Each signature is his own handwriting. Each one links him more to deceit." Kody's attorney finally stood, his tone strained. "Objection, Your Honor. These are circumstantial at best." The prosecutor wheeled about, his voice cutting. "Circumstantial? Mr. Brown's signature is on each and every one of them. His handwriting, his accounts, his trail. There's nothing circumstantial about the truth." The judge overruled the objection with a nod. "Proceed." The prosecutor placed the contracts on the table and drew out a final pile of papers. "And now the messages.
texts and emails sent directly from the defendant's personal accounts. The courtroom descended into a silence so profound that the scraping of the papers against the table sounded like thunder. These messages, the prosecutor continued, disclose intent. They disclose not only secrecy, but strategy. Strategies to manipulate, to divide, and to keep control at all costs. He read from one of the emails aloud. They'll do what I say. They always do. While I possess the information, I possess the power. The gallery appeared to shiver with a collective chill. Christine's tears now fell in uncontrolled streams, her shoulders convulsively shaking. Janelle set her lips in a hard line, rage clawing its way onto her face. Mary closed her eyes, her body shaking. Robin muttered something beneath her breath, her gaze fixed on Kody. Yet another passage was read aloud. Keep the files hidden. If they ever see them, it's over. Don't let them find out. The jury's faces set. A couple of notes were jotted down. Most simply glared at Kody, their faces stern. The prosecutor put the messages on the evidence table. Then, in a final gesture, he reached into the folder and brought out a small photograph. He held it aloft, then carried it himself to the jury box. This, he said, his voice falling lower, heavier, is the face of betrayal. The photo depicted Kody, sitting in an office, papers scattered on the desk, a grin on his face as he signed away. The timestamp in the bottom corner coincided with one of the bogus contracts. It was the look of a man who thought no one was looking. The gallery erupted again. Shouts, gasps, some even stood, only to be told to sit down by the bailiff. Kody's face went white. His eyes roamed frantically, looking for a way out, a hole in the floor to engulf him. His hands trembled as he clutched the table. This is a lie, he finally screamed, his voice cracking. This is all twisted. The judge brought down his gavel. Mr. Brown, one more outburst and you will be taken out of this courtroom. The room fell silent once more, but the silence was no comfort. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with judgment. The prosecutor turned back to the jury, his voice calm but deadly. You've seen the documents. You've read the messages. You've heard his voice. Every piece of evidence leads to one conclusion. Deception was not an accident. It was intentional. It was calculated. And it was cruel. The jury remained still, their faces frozen. The gallery murmured in hushed tones, the weight of deceit bearing down upon all of them. Kody slumped at the defense table, his hands shaking, his face ashen. His attorney whispered urgently, but Kody did not move. He gazed at the table, his mind reeling, his world crumbling. For so long, he had thought he was above the law, that his secrets were safe. But now, revealed under the bright lights of the courtroom, there was nowhere to hide. The prosecutor laid the last piece of evidence on the stand, his voice resonating through the still air. The evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Brown constructed his reality on falsehoods, and today, those falsehoods have been brought to light. The judge rested back, her expression stern. The jury shifted uncomfortably. The gallery's breath was held, and in that silence, one thing was evident. The walls were closing in around Kody Brown, and there was no escape. The courtroom fell silent, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, stifling kind, the kind that comes after a storm, when the air still resounds with electricity. Piles of evidence rested on the table. Pictures, agreements, messages, and the USB drive that had brought Kody's own voice into the room. Against him before all of them, the prosecutor stood with his hands behind his back, tall and straight, as if the case had already made itself known. The defense lawyer slumped over, his papers scattered, his confidence broken. And Kody Brown, he sat with his head bowed, shoulders slumped, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembled against the table. The man who once carried himself with control, who always seemed to hold power in every room he entered, now looked small, defeated, exposed. The judge cleared her throat, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom. The sound alone made people sit straighter, leaning forward in anticipation. After reviewing the evidence presented, she began, her voice steady and commanding. This court finds the actions of the defendant deeply troubling. The documents, the contracts, the communications, all point to deliberate deception. The recordings confirm intent. Her words rang out like hammer strikes. each one driving deeper into Kody's unraveling world. Kody's lawyer scrambled to rise, desperation in his tone. "Your Honor, if I may." "Sit down, counselor." The judge brusquely interrupted him. "Time for arguing is over." The courtroom exploded in whispers once more. Reporters leaned in, pens resting, waiting to record the moment that would grace headline. The judge's gaze shifted to Kody. For a beat of time she just stared at him, her eyes boring into him. The quiet hung so long that even the catch of breathing sounded too loud. "Mr. Brown," she finally said, her voice low but with an edge. "Do you have anything you'd like to say before I make my decision?" The courtroom leaned forward, waiting for his response. Kody raised his head slowly. His eyes darted to the gallery, to the faces of the women who had once trusted him. Christine's tear-streaked cheeks, Janelle's clenched jaw, Mary's cold, unreadable stare, Robin's conflicted expression, her hands trembling in her lap. He opened his mouth. For a moment no sound came out. Then, finally, words broken, jagged words. "I did what I needed to do," he declared, shaking. "I only wanted to protect, to keep things under control. Without it, everything would have collapsed. They wouldn't have known. None of you ever knew."
His voice broke, rising in desperation. "I built this family, I kept it going. And now you all just sit there, judging me, like I'm some kind of criminal. Enough." The judge's gavel came down, interrupting his tirade. The gallery hummed more loudly, but the judge's glare shut them up in an instant. "Mr. Brown," she said coldly, "this has nothing to do with your reputation. This has nothing to do with control. This has nothing to do with anything but truth. And the truth has spoken." Kody sat back in his chair, his eyes white, his lips shaking. His attorney placed a hand on the shoulder of the young man, but he shrugged it away, staring at the table before him. The judge went on, her words with the last weight of decision. "Evidence against Mr. Brown is so overwhelming and irrefutable. His actions constitute not just dishonesty, but betrayal of his family, his people, and the trust he once enjoyed. The verdict is evident." She raised her gavel, held for a moment, just long enough to make the silence intolerable. "Guilty." The gavel fell, once, twice, 3 times. The sound was final, irrevocable. The gallery exploded, gasps, shouts, sobs. Reporters were scrambling, cameras flashed, the blast of sound filling the room like an explosion. The bailiff yelled to bring order back, but the force was uncontainable. Christine sobbed openly, hiding her face in her hands. Janelle let out a heavy sigh, as if a burden she had been carrying for years had at last been removed. Mary shook her head slowly, her face inscrutable, but her eyes shimmering. Robin gripped her chest, moaning, "No, no, no," repeatedly. Kody sat in stony silence, eyes fixed on the floor, his body shaking, his face was pale, his mouth working in soft words unspoken to anyone. The prosecutor assembled his papers quietly, his work completed. He didn't have to rub it in. The evidence had already done that. The judge banged her gavel for the last time. "This court is adjourned." The room burst out again, but the words were lost in the ringing of the deafening announcement in Kody's ears. "Guilty, guilty, guilty." Bailiffs moved forward, moving toward the defense table. One put a firm hand on Kody's shoulder. "Sir, it's time to go." Kody's head snapped up. For an instant he seemed feral, his eyes jumping wildly around the room. "No, this isn't. It's not supposed to end this way. I was in charge. I was always in charge." But control was lost. The bailiffs escorted him to stand. His knees buckled a little and he stumbled, holding on to the edge of the table before they jerked him away. Cameras popped. Journalists yelled out questions. His family stood in stunned silence, each one trying to wrap their head around the devastation of what had just transpired. As Kody was taken in through the doors of the courtroom, the whispers trailed behind him. Liar. Betrayal. Justice. Each one of them hitting him harder than the gavel had. The doors closed, and poof. The man who had constructed his own world out of secrets was no more. What was left was the truth. And the truth had destroyed him.